welcome to this latest roundup of news and polls from Ipsos MORI. And with coronavirus restrictions reaching new heights across the country, with levels 1, 2 and 3 now being introduced in our Tier 3 system, we find that actually, despite lots of noise and bother in the media, 3/4 of the public say that they're following government rules either completely or nearly all the time. We've only got 4 people in 100 who say that they're not paying very much attention. So the public buys that there is a clear and present danger from the coronavirus. The minority who are not following the rules, or say they're not, are people who are not observing social distancing or perhaps visiting friends and family when they're not allowed to. And it's more that than what goes on in shops or on public transport that seems to be the issue. But most people say they support government measures, and indeed, by some margin, are more likely to say they're not strict enough. The reason for that seems to be that overall people find the arguments for the restrictions generally convincing, and so particularly the arguments around protecting the NHS, stopping the virus spreading to vulnerable groups, and actually just protecting one's own friend and family have 9 out of 10 people all saying that those arguments are convincing. Where the government perhaps runs into trouble is when it does one thing and says something else. And there, of course, the most convincing reason for not following the rules, according to the public, is that people in government, perhaps like Dominic Cummings, haven't been following the rules, so neither should the rest of us. And 47% of us find that a pretty good argument. Why should we do it if they won't? So, there's some lessons for government in terms of consistency of behaviour and messaging. But overall, the public is supportive of what the government is doing on lockdown measures and restrictions, and if anything, as I say, would like them to be stronger. At the same time, the virus, it's how it's being handled, but also Brexit, the European Union, all seem to be leading to a rise in support for Scottish independence. And very recently, our most recent poll has nearly 6 out of 10 Scots now saying that if they voted in a referendum on Scottish independence, they would now vote to leave the UK. And that's, as I say, the highest figure we've ever recorded. The arguments that they find attractive are in some ways similar to the arguments that Brexiteers made for leaving the European Union. That Scotland should be independent because they can't trust the Westminster government to act in their interests, that they want a different political direction to England. So many of the same arguments made in favour of Brexit are now seem to be convincing Scots that they should leave the UK. It's also the case that they're much more positive about Nicola Sturgeon and her party, the SNP, than they are about any of the other national parties or the unionist parties. 72% of Scots happy with Nicola Sturgeon's in terms of the way she does her job. The figure, of course, for Boris Johnson is only 19%. And Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are not making any great waves in Scotland either. So some really interesting data. When we look at the obverse, the reasons that might persuade the Scots to stay in the end is, of course, the economy and jobs. Although it's notable that if it becomes an emotional argument, as indeed Brexit was for many people, then that might not be enough to stop Scotland eventually leaving. When we look at the economy and jobs generally, of course, we're into our second wave of coronavirus in Britain and indeed in many countries now. And globally, we've been looking at concern people have about their job security. Globally, we found that 54% of people in jobs are actually worried about losing their job, and it's as high as 75% in Russia, much lower in Germany at only 26%, but in countries like Spain, which are being ravaged by the virus, 3/4 currently worried about losing their jobs. So the anxiety probably massively outstrips the actual risk of losing their jobs. It is not, no country is going to have 1/4 of its population losing their jobs, or very, very few, but it just shows the level of anxiety that's present. Another thing that's triggering anxiety in America, of course, is the American election in just a few weeks, few days to go. Joe Biden remains firmly in the lead, 9 points ahead, further ahead than Hillary Clinton was against Donald Trump last time. And Biden is also ahead in the swing states, but there are still undecided people, and 41% of Americans remain satisfied with Donald Trump's handling of his job. The figure for Boris Johnson in Britain is only 32%, so it's going to be bitterly contested. Everybody is holding onto their hats to see what happens. If Joe Biden does win, more British people think it will be good than bad for Britain, whereas if Donald Trump wins, because most people in Britain don't much like Donald Trump, the view is by a margin of about 3-1 that it will be a negative impact. So we'll see what happens, but everybody will be paying a lot of attention. Will it make a difference to the trade deal? Well, we've got 1 in 5 who say it'll be good, a better trade deal if Joe Biden wins, but 16% if Donald Trump wins, so not much in it. 26% are pessimistic and say whoever wins won't give us a good trade deal, and that's rather more than the 17% who think it's whichever of them win will get a great deal. So we're pessimistic about our likelihood of getting a great deal out of America, whoever wins. In terms of what happens with the pandemic and what it really means in terms of our changing societies and our changing consumer behaviours, one thing that should be interesting to many listeners to this call is the relaunch of Global Trends 2020. We've just updated it to see exactly how much COVID-19, Zoom calls and Black Lives Matter, to name just a few of the major events of the year, have altered actual people's underlying values. Behaviours changed massively, but how much of our values have changed? Please join me on the 11th of November at that. And the day before, on the 10th of November, we're launching a new documentary that we've made with our ethnography team based on filming in around 30 different households across 7 different continents. And that's a fascinating piece of work looking at in America, China, France, Russia, Italy, Britain, looking at exactly what is the lived experience of the pandemic and exactly how it blindsided us, how it shocked us and changed our behaviours, but possibly what good things might come out of it in the end. Finally, elsewhere, we've looked at trust in the media and how it's changing. There's a new global report on that. We've looked at what employers need to do for women and menopause. We've destigmatised mental health by and large in many countries over the last decade, but the menopause remains one of those things that we don't really talk about, despite the fact that the majority of the population are female and despite the fact that nearly all of them are going to go through it. And probably we should talk more about that. And finally, in the year of Black Lives Matter, we've looked at the relationship between race, diversity and entrepreneurship for the British Business Bank. How does it work if you're white compared to black, starting out a new business? Well worth having a look. That's all for now. I look forward to seeing you on either the 10th or the 11th of November. Thank you.